Tonight we're picking up where we left off last week. We didn't quite finish all the seals. We did seal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Tonight we're going to finish off the 6th seal and we're going to move into chapter 7. And tonight when we hit chapter 7, I'm going to be giving you the viewpoint of every point of view that you can have on who the 144,000 are. That's kind of what we're going to be doing. But to start, we're going to finish off chapter 6. Chapter 6, starting at verse 12, the 6th seal. It says, I looked when he opened the 6th seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood. And the stars of heaven fell to the earth, as a fig tree drops its late figs when it is shaken by a mighty wind. Then the sky receded as a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place. And the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and every free man, hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountain and the rocks, Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne, from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? All right. So we're going to finish this off. Now, just a reminder, the way I teach, the one I hold to, that this is a literal event. I do not hold to a symbolic understanding of the text. And what I mean by that is, if it says earthquake, I'm not making that symbolic, saying, oh, that just means a great movement amongst all the people so that the world seems it's going to shake and a world movement shake. No. If it says earthquake, it's an earthquake. There's no reason to doubt it. And so there's no way, in other words, I don't look at it from, the one that really does this from a point of view would be what's called the amillennial point of view, where everything is symbolic pretty much. It stands for something else. It's not literal kind of thing. And the other thing that I built up from last week, you remember, I drew the connection between chapter 6 and Matthew 24. Now, it's not one for one, identical, but when you start looking at it, Jesus said there'll become false Christs, false messiahs. And then there's going to be times of war, kingdom against kingdom. There's going to be famine and pestilence in many places, but the end has not yet come. And he even talks about earthquakes in diverse places. And all of this is the setup for what is to come. And Revelation 6 seems to follow that same pattern. And so the 6th seal opening is kind of the real kickoff of the wrath's lamb. The lamb's wrath. There we go. Happens every once in a while. Why would my words switch on me? The lamb's wrath that is to come. And so people go, well, is this during the tribulation? Well, yes, it is. But not all of the tribulation is full-on wrath. It comes in stages. In other words, there's kind of lulls. And so the first couple of seals that we looked at are the prelude to really what's going to come. It's the setup, if you want. And the 6th seal opens up, and it really announces that now this is what's going to come. And you have this tremendous event that takes place. And then you look and the 7th seal gets opened. We're going to cover this in a couple of weeks. And what does it say? There's silence. So it's kind of like, if you think about it, a big uproar announcement. If you're at a play or whatnot, announcement comes in, the lights flash, and then all of a sudden, before the curtain breaks, it just goes dark for a second. And everybody goes quiet because now they're waiting for it to begin. And this is what the seals are doing. And so this seal, the 6th seal, it's an earthquake that is unlike any other. It's one that hasn't been paralleled, and it's going to cause tremendous events. And it says that every mountain is going to move. Now, and rock is going to move. It doesn't mean it's going to disappear. It just means it's felt everywhere. It's an earthquake that is, there's no place you can hide from it. So it's not like here when people try to decide, you know what, I'm not going to move to California because of the San Andreas fault and a big earthquake. And there's always talk every year. It's like, is this the year for the big one where the plates are? Just for people who aren't familiar what a vault actually is, we understand it that there's plates underneath the crust of the earth that kind of move. And so a fault line is where two plates can meet. And there's just kind of a lull. And when they crash together, well, that's going to be bad. If one jets up, then we have the crust of the earth break, that kind of thing. And so people avoid earthquake places, but there's no place to hide from this. This one is going to be so great that it's everywhere. And accompanying it is going to be something that's unprecedented. It says it's going to be an actual sign in the sun, in the moon, and the stars. Now, if you want kind of a more, we'll say, environmental explanation for these or naturalistic explanation for that, we've had experiences like this, if you think about it. When a great wildfire breaks out, the smoke can go in front of the sun and it causes the sun to look red. Or it can block out the sun with enough smoke and things like that. So there is an idea here, if you want a more naturalistic, if an earthquake is this great and a volcano erupts and it kicks its soot and everything into the air, this can happen. Is that possible? It's possible that that's what it's talking about. Or it's talking about the fact that since this is a signal of the start, that there is a cosmic sign, an actual cosmic sign that happens. And that from where it is daylight when it hits, the sun becomes dark. And when there's the moon, it's going to be blood red. And the Old Testament, when it talks about this, you can see it quoted in Acts, it talks about it as the day of the Lord is coming. And so when everything happens here, it's going to be such an event that the sky itself is going to look like it splits in half. Now, that's kind of a fascinating thing, because if I asked you what exactly is the sky, it's a space. It's just space kind of thing. So when you look at that, it's quite possible that it's going to be the clouds that are there are suddenly just going to look like they rip apart. If you have a night sky, it'll be that the stars kind of disappear almost if it's ripped. Now, I'm speculating a little bit here because I don't know. Until it happens, I can't tell you what's going to happen. That's kind of the thing about some of this. Although it's literal, I can't tell you what that looks like, kind of thing. It's like if I tell you somebody's going to make a literal cake, you know it's going to be a cake. But depending on what they do, it can look kind of different. But it does match up. This description matches up like the Old Testament. Like I said, the prophecy of Joel. Joel 2, 30 and 31 talk about this. Peter quotes it in Acts. And so this event seems to mark the real start of the wrath going to come. And the event is so terrifying that it has everybody asking a question, like, if this is so terrible, who can stand? Who's going to be able to survive this? Because if that's the prelude where everything is shaking, the sky seems to change, the sun goes dark, the moon goes blood red, every mountain is shaking, every valley is quivering, and the Lamb hasn't even shown up yet, who can stand? And that's a valid question. And so when we come to spots in Revelation where this happens, Revelation, as it's written, has what you can call interludes. And what that usually happens is a question gets asked and then an interlude, an answer gives. Now, not always. There's other times where it's just a side interlude, or it backtracks a bit. And when we come into chapter 7, this is where I disagree with certain frameworks. Chapter 7, when I look at it, is an interlude. Now, why do I say that? If you're familiar with the Left Behind series, I've read all the Left Behind series. I have the dramatized version of the Left Behind series. It's actually fascinating to listen to. They will hold that this is not an interlude. This is the next event. So in other words, the seal 1, seal 2, seal 3, seal 4, seal 5, seal 6. Then these events take place, and there's this big interlude, and then seal 7 happens sometime later. Although even in the Left Behind series, I don't remember them actually dealing with the 7th seal outside of it just calling it a time of quiet. Nothing really happens during that time. But I don't. Like I said, I see chapter 7 answering a very important question. And it's the question that is asked. Now, one of the problems that can happen with our modern Bibles, and something that's added in is the fact that is good, is these chapter divisions and verse divisions. Now, why are they good? Well, I've already taken use of this. I told you we're going to start in chapter 6, verse 12. Now, can you imagine if I just said, okay, open the book of Revelation where we left off, and I start reading, and then everyone's going, okay, where is he? Where is he? Where is he? Where is he? And so the numbers were added, and the chapters were added so we can study it easier. That's really what they were added for. They're not divine. They're an addition for us. Why is that important? Because a lot of times what can happen is we can separate sections based on chapters, kind of thing. And this is a place where that can happen. So they notice when they put them in that, hey, this is a break, so let's put a chapter in here. It's a good place to spark a chapter. But all these events come right after each other. And so John looks and he sees the events and he sees what's happened and he hears the people crying out, "Who for the day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand?" Now the interesting thing here is, I'm back up here a bit. Who's the his there? Well, you look and it says, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne." Okay, there's a him who's mentioned. And from the wrath of the Lamb. Now notice it doesn't attribute wrath to the Father on the throne. It attributes it to the Lamb. So when they're saying the great day of his wrath has come, it's clearly to the Lamb. Now that is significant, especially in today's culture. If you asked, how do they represent Jesus? Love, peaceful, unifying, everybody get along. How does John here represent him? Wrathful, vengeful. He's going to pour out his wrath. We already sang the song kind of day. He's the one alone who treads the winepress of God's wrath. Picture in Zechariah has him coming through the battlefield and his robe is covered in blood to a point because he alone is the one who's done this. So the wrath here is of the Lamb. Yes, Jesus is loving. Yes, he is merciful. Yes, he is graceful. But he's also the God of wrath. And this also throws out this idea that the God of the Old Testament is different from the God of the New. Now, this is a side too, where people say, well, the God of the Old, he was vengeful, he was wrathful, but Jesus stepped in and he's now peaceful and he brings peace for us. No. Jesus was there when wrath was poured out. Jesus was there with Sodom and Gomorrah. Jesus was there with the flood. Jesus was there when judgment was poured out. And at the end, his judgment is still what is being poured out. Because Jesus has come and he has offered mercy and grace to the entire world. And if they reject it, his wrath will come out. And they're fleeing from Jesus, the Lamb. And now, so they ask that question, who is able to stand? And this brings us to chapter 7. Let's move into chapter 7. After these things, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, and that the wind should not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, "Do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God on their forehead." And I heard the number of those who were sealed. 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. Of the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Gad, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Asher, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Simeon, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Levi, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Issachar, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Joseph, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000 were sealed. Now I'm going to stop there just because that's about as far as we'll get tonight. But, all right. So, to break this down, I'm going to give you the different viewpoints on who are the 144,000. That's really what we're going to do. And I'm not going to hit on the Jehovah's Witnesses. Sorry, they're just plain wrong. Yeah, I know, that's not loving to say somebody's wrong. Sorry. Truth is truth. False is false. They're wrong. Kind of thing. That's just the way it is. But before we do that, as I said, do not separate chapter 7 from chapter 6. This is an interlude that is interrupting the seals because a question is asked, and I imagine that John is asking the same question. Why? Because remember when Jesus first showed up in Revelation before John was taken up in the Spirit to see this? Jesus showed up and he says, I fell as if I were dead before him. I was petrified. And the Jesus that John witnessed during the time, he saw Jesus' righteous anger. He understood it. John chapter 2. Make sure I'm getting my right reference right here. Yeah, John chapter 2, Jesus clears out the temple at that point. And here's that one. Now the later clearing of the temple, they also remember. It says, we remembered later that zeal for your house shall fill me. And he drives everybody out. And so John sees, and John wonders, like, wait a minute, this is the fullness of his wrath. Nobody's going to be able to stand. It's like if Jesus so chooses, nobody gets out. And so when he sees this, he says, I see the four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth, and the wind should not blow on the earth on anything. In other words, he's saying it stopped for a second. This is actually representative of the judgment. It's going to hit everywhere. It's like it stopped. Why? Because he says, then I saw another angel ascending from the east. Now it's interesting that the east is chosen there of the four directions. Why would that be? That's where Jerusalem typically would be. That's where Israel is. Having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the four angels, don't harm the earth, so don't do anything, the sea, the trees, until we've sealed the servants of the God on our forehead. Now, this isn't the only sealing that's mentioned in the scriptures. There's another time that this imagery is used. It's actually in the book of Ezekiel. Now, the cross-reference here is Ezekiel chapter 9. I'm going to go visit Ezekiel chapter 9. Let's head there. Jump too far. Ezekiel 9. Let's start at verse 4. Now, Ezekiel 9 is a judgment on the wicked. Here's what he says. I'm picking up I'll start verse 3 to start the sentence. I don't like starting in the middle of a sentence. Now the glory of the God of Israel had gone up from the cherub, where it had been, to the threshold of the temple. And he called to the man clothed with linen, who had the writer's inkhorn at his side, and the Lord said to him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and cry over all the abominations that are done within it. To the others he said in my hearing, go after him through the city and kill. Do not let your eye spare, nor have any pity. Utterly slay old and young men, maiden and little children and women, but do not come near anyone on whom is the mark, and begin at my sanctuary." So they began with the elders who were before the temple. We'll stop there. Notice a pattern. The judgment has been declared. God's moved to the threshing floor in Ezekiel. Why is that important? Because that's the harvest. And he's about to reap. But the first thing he says is, "Go seal mine." In this case, how does we know who are his? Notice he even gives the thing. The men who sigh and cry over all the abominations. That's the representation. Why? Because what were everybody else doing? They were partaking in worship. They were bringing sacrifices. They were engaging. They were going through the motions. But it was the heart that God looked at. It's not who's bringing in offerings. It was who is sighing and crying over the abominations. Who is actually bearing the fruit of repentance. And he's like, "And seal them from the judgment." Now, this isn't a new thing in the scriptures. When you look, before the flood hit, what did God do? Noah, you're sealed. Now, his sealing is within the ark. Before Sodom and Gomorrah, Abram, this is a very important text, even in the Old Testament. Abram asks God a question. "Will you wipe out the righteous with the wicked? Will not the Lord of all do what is right?" And God says, he makes it plain, "I'm not going to wipe out the righteous." And so when his judgment is coming, he's not going to wipe out the righteous. Paul picks up the same thing. What does he say? "For we are not appointed to wrath." And so this question is like, it's like, if it's going to hit everywhere, how can anybody stand? He's like, "Freeze, before this happens, I'm going to seal." And he makes it clear. What does he say? "Do not do anything until I seal them," the mark on their forehead. Now, you're going to have to keep that in mind for quite a while, because that's going to come up again much later. A sealing on the forehead. Gee, I wonder why that gets done. Kind of thing. And so it should be no surprise that there is this kind of sealing before the judgment pours out. And so now it says, "And I heard the number of who were sealed." Now comes the question, who are 144,000? So, I'm going to give you 3 views, and then I'm going to tell you mine. All right? First, I'll give you one that is very popular in certain circles, the dispensationalist point of view. The 144,000 they'll hold is a literal number. And they hold that this is literal Jewish males, 12,000 from each tribe, that they're sealed during the tribulation. What I mean by that is the seals have happened. Don't confuse sealing here with those seals. Seals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then they get a seal. In Left Behind, they actually have this mark like a cross that appears on their forehead that can only be visible to other believers. That's how Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins depict it in there. And they hold that the 144,000 are evangelists, male Jewish evangelists that go out and evangelize the world. That's what they hold. And then, I didn't read this part, the next section talks about a great multitude. They hold that this is the Gentiles and all those who believe the message of these 144,000 Jewish evangelists. And so their focus is, these are a literal remnant within Israel who are sealed for a specific purpose, and that the rest of the people are the tribulation saints. That's pretty much how they view it, kind of thing. I'm not going to tell you my problem right now. I'll explain that in a second when I get to my view. The second is what you can classify as the classical futurist point of view. This is before dispensationalism. They are similar but different. But they hold that the 144,000 represents all believers of the church, is what they hold. So all the people of God on earth during the tribulation, not just necessarily the Israelites. So 144,000, what they do is they take the number of 12 as symbolic as wholeness or completeness, which often happens in Scripture, and say, well, they're representing all believers. So then you go, well, what is the great multitude? Well, they're the same group, but different. This is now showing their victory. So they're the believers from all nations representing the ultimate triumph of God's people. So in other words, they see them as the same group, just at two different points. They're sealed, and now we see their victory. Who can stand? They're sealed and they're praising now. That's kind of the viewpoint there. And so they don't make a distinction here between ethnic distinction. They just hold the universal triumph of God's people, kind of thing. Then the amillennialists. Okay?
Say it again.
Amillennialist. Okay? Understand, they hold that the book of Revelation is largely symbolic. So tribulation and judgment are spiritual realities rather than literal events, kind of thing. So with that, it should be no surprise. The 144,000, that's just symbolic. That's symbolic of all people, all the church of whole time who represent spiritual Israel, kind of thing. And the great multitude, they have a similar kind of view as a classical futurist here. That's just all the redeemed across all history praising in heaven. So that's kind of the three views. So you have dispensationalists. These are literal, 144,000. That's the actual number. They're Jews. And then in their point of view, they are evangelists who evangelize the world. The great multitude are the converts under their ministry. Classical futurists, 144,000 is symbolic of the completeness of God's people who are sealed, not under wrath, and they become the great multitude of praise, who are victorious. Amillennials are similar. The 144,000 are the church. That's one thing you understand. Not Israel, the church. They do replacement theology. And it represents all the believers of the church, and they praise in heaven at the victory. Kind of get those three straight? All right. My view. What do I hold? From my study, okay? I've already told you that based on the placement of the text, where this happens, I hold that this is answering the question. So this is going to mean I don't necessarily hold to the dispensationalist view, which says after the sixth seal, then there's a sealing, a commissioning of 144,000 literal Jews become evangelists. Okay, my biggest problem with that is, where in the text does it say they're evangelists? I've run into that and I've mulled over that, and even when I dig into the viewpoint of those who hold it, I can't find where they base it on, really. And that's one of the major problems I run into. That when I dig into it, I can't even trace back to who said it first, kind of thing. So I run into that. So that's a case where, I'm sorry to say this, but in that viewpoint, they impose their viewpoint on the text rather than let the text influence their viewpoint. And so I hold that this is the case. So I also hold that the 144,000, there's no reason to debate that this is Israel. This actually is Israel. There's no reason to debate that. And I'll tell you why. It's really strange to say this is symbolic of the church and have all 12 tribes mentioned, or mention 12 tribes. So I'm going to clarify that in a minute, is why. Because there's 2 tribes that aren't mentioned. And we'll cover that if I got time tonight. It's just a strange peculiarity. Why, if you're going to say everybody is sealed, why spend the time to go 12,000, 12,000, 12,000, 12,000, 12,000? I'm not doing it 12 times again. And then say there's a great multitude. I think this is exactly the 12 tribes. That these are these are literal Israelites. These are descendants of the Jews. Why? And you go, why? Because I'm going to show you what I think. I think this represents, I think the number is symbolic in of itself. The 12 I think it represents completeness and wholeness. And I'm combining this a little bit with Romans chapter 11. I'm going to go visit Romans 11 for a second. Now, Romans 11 is an important chapter as well. Now, just, when I say that, that doesn't mean I don't think other chapters aren't important. Don't take me on that. It just means something that I think is foundational to us to understand. Romans 11, Paul is dealing with a point of view that could come up. Has Israel been rejected? And has God moved on, kind of thing? And the answer is no. They have a partial rejection, but it's not total and it's not permanent. But here's what it says. Chapter 11, I want to go down to verse 26, 27 is where I'm going. Now, I'm going to start at verse 25 because it kind of answers a question too. Verse 25, 26, 27. Chapter 11 of Romans says, "For I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And so all Israel will be saved, as it is written, the deliverer will come out of Zion, and he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant with them, when I take away their sin." Now notice he said, all Israel will be saved. But then you go, wait a minute. Does that mean all Israel? You have to define Israel here. We already have grounds here already in Revelation that he says this. Those who think they are Jews and are not. Those who think they are part of the Jewish synagogue and are not. They are a synagogue of Satan. Even Jesus said this. When the people tried to claim, we have Abraham as our father. He's like, no, you don't. If you had Abraham as your father, then you would believe me. Your father is the devil. So when I'm talking about Israel here, am I talking about literal descendants of Israel? Yes. Am I saying that every Israelite who's alive right now is included there? No. At the time, by the end of the tribulation, understand this, there's only going to be about a third of the Israelites left. And all of them are going to be followers of Jesus. How do I get that? Zechariah tells us that. If you really want to read it, Zechariah 12 to 14, the whole chapter. I'm not reading all of it tonight. It tells us that by the end, 2/3 are going to experience the judgment. And that's all that's going to be left. Now, is this a surprise? Well, no. Let's look at the pattern of history. When God sent them off to exile in Babylon, God made it clear. He said, of 1,000 that are going to go, only 100 are going to come back. When 100 go, only 10 are going to come back. And when they first came back from the exile, what was their response? We submit. We praise. We follow. Now, they didn't last long, but it gives a point. And so when this happens, then all those who are left, it's probably going to be greater than 144,000, they are sealed. Now, why mention Israel first? Well, salvation is first for the Jew, then for the Gentile. So what is it reminding of? God has not rejected Israel. He's keeping his covenant, and his promises are kept. And now with them, so all believing Israel gets saved, but what about everybody else? Well, look at the description. I didn't read this again, but look at the description of the multitude here. And look what they say. After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes. Notice the description here. They're of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues. What about everybody else? Well, they're covered too. They've got the victory. In other words, they're all sealed. Israel's got their seal. The believers got their seal. Now, we may go, wait a minute, does this mean that during the tribulation that no believers are going to feel any of the wraths? Side effects, yes. Direct part, no. In other words, they're still going to experience things. If the water turns to blood, they're going to see it, they're going to smell it, it's going to be around them. To understand this, look at the plagues in Egypt. It's a great picture of it. Up to a point, they felt everything. Then he said, now I'm going to make a distinction between my people and their people. 3 days of darkness hits. There's darkness all throughout Egypt, but there's light in Goshen. What if the Israelites left Goshen? Is light suddenly going to follow them? No, the darkness is going to be there. The crops are probably going to be felt. Think about this. Locusts came and ate the crops of the Egyptians. This is a part you probably don't think about, right? Crops were made in Goshen. Where do you think the Egyptians are going to go to get food? They're probably going to go, you guys got food, we own you, give us a food. In other words, they're going to feel effects, side effects, but they're not the target. Noah was in the boat, safe and secure, although he didn't get the rain on him. And when the floodgates opened from the depths opened up, he didn't get hit. I'm pretty sure it wasn't crystal sea the whole time. He probably got rocking on that boat. I hope he got good seasickness pills. I'm kidding. But he felt it. There was effects. But he was brought through it. And so this is the picture. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be hard times. In fact, there is. When we read later, what does it talk about? It said the beast has power to make war on the saints and to conquer them for a time. Now you go, wait a minute, hold on. I thought that it says the church of God will never fail. The gates of hell will never prevail against it. That's from the world's perspective. Even in that point, when we get there, they ask the question, who is like the beast and who can stand? Who can be against him? The very next section, there's an interlude. What do I look? And I look and see another crowd. Where are they standing with robes? Well, how did they overcome? They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. From the world's view, they were conquered. They weren't conquered. And so this representation here is the reality of 1 Thessalonians 5:8. We are not appointed to wrath. It keeps the covenant. All Israel will be saved. What about the Gentiles? They are also victorious. How are they victorious? Well, they have a white robe that has been given to them. The robe of the righteousness of Christ. And they are victorious. This keeps it all in balance. And so when I come to this is how I look at it. That it answers the question, who is able to stand? It answers God's promise that all Israel will be saved. It keeps his covenant. Israel is saved, the completeness of Israel. What about the others? They are also sealed. An extension extends to the Gentiles. Every tribe, tongue, nation, and peoples are standing there with white robes. And this kind of answers the question. So this is where my stand is on it. Now you go, who's right? I don't know. I don't know. You can judge that for yourself. This is one of those things that, yeah, I can argue my point. Will it adapt and change as I continue to study and grow? Absolutely. But that's where I look to. And so when you actually notice that, I'm actually not in any of the camps. Exactly. I'm in something a little different. But when you run into a passage like that, you run into a struggle like that, try to let the text speak for itself. See what it says. Keep it in context. What's around it? And keep in mind whatever else has been said. This is when you deal with any difficult passages. Always allow clearer passages to help you understand the unclear. Never go to the unclear passage and go, okay, I'm going to make a teaching from this. No. Go to the clear ones. If God says this, then that becomes clear. And that's the way we work. And so that's how I even approach this. And so I'll stop there for tonight. Next week, we're going to work through the tribes because there's 12 tribes listed. And they sound good, but there's some funny things going with this list that are kind of interesting. And so we'll take a look at that next week. So